Welcome to our channel. Today, we are going to explore a phenomenon that confuses many of my patients: the sudden, crushing wave of fatigue that hits you after spending time with people you genuinely love. It is a profound paradox. You cherish your friends, you enjoy your family, yet after 3 hours of brunch or an evening gathering, you feel physically and mentally hollowed out. This is not necessarily about depression or social anxiety, though those can play a part. It is often a strictly neurobiological event. We tend to view our social stamina as a reflection of our character or our affection for others, but in reality, it is a resource management issue within the brain. Today, we will deconstruct the mechanics of this exhaustion.
It is such a relatable feeling, Elena. I think we have all been there. You are at a dinner party, laughing, having a wonderful time, and then suddenly it's like someone pulled the plug on your energy supply. You hit a wall. You aren't bored and you aren't angry, but your brain just stops processing. In the medical science community, we often refer to this colloquially as the social battery draining. But that metaphor, while useful, simplifies a very complex physiological process. It's fascinating because even extroverts can hit this wall, though their threshold is different. We need to look at what is actually happening at the synaptic level when we interact with others for prolonged periods.
Precisely, Jane. To understand this, we must look at the varying reward pathways in the brain. The primary distinction between those who gain energy from socializing and those who are drained by it often comes down to how their brains respond to the neurotransmitter dopamine. When extroverts socialize, their brains release dopamine in the reward centers, creating a surge of energy and gratification. It feels like a high. However, for those who are more introverted or highly sensitive, the dopamine pathway is not the primary avenue for feelings of well-being. In fact, excessive dopamine stimulation for them can feel overwhelming, like a loud noise that won't stop, leading to a rapid sense of overstimulation rather than pleasure.
That is a critical distinction. While the extrovert runs on dopamine, the introvert's brain often favors a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is linked to the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. It induces a feeling of pleasure and contentment during internal reflection, reading, or deep, quiet one-on-one conversations. When an acetylcholine-dominant person is in a high-stimulation environment, like a busy restaurant or a group gathering, they're essentially fighting their own biology. Their brain is shouting for calm and focus to generate well-being, but the environment is forcing a dopamine response that feels chemically expensive and agitating. It is a metabolic clash that results in rapid fatigue.
And this brings us to the concept of sensory gating. This is the neurological process by which the brain filters out redundant or unnecessary stimuli. Imagine you are in a cafe. Your brain has to ignore the clinking of cups, the hum of the refrigerator, the traffic outside, and the conversation at the next table, all to focus on your friend's voice. For many people, this gating mechanism is not automatic. It requires active cognitive effort. If you have leaky sensory gating, your brain is processing every single piece of sensory data as if it were important. You aren't just socializing, you are physiologically defending yourself against a barrage of data, which consumes massive amounts of glucose.
That explains why the exhaustion feels so physical. It's not just, I'm tired of talking, it's my brain is tired of processing. We also have to consider the sheer computational power required for social interaction. It is arguably one of the most complex tasks the human brain performs. We are constantly decoding microexpressions, tone of voice, body language, and subtext. We are predicting what the other person will say next and formulating a socially acceptable response simultaneously. When we do this for hours, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function and decision-making, begins to fatigue. This is why after a long social event, making even a simple decision, like what to eat for dinner, feels impossible.
Exactly. And we layer another exhausting element on top of that processing: micromasking. Even with friends we love, we often engage in subtle forms of performance. We maintain eye contact even when we want to look away. We smile to show engagement even if we are neutral. We suppress yawns or signs of boredom. This is emotional labor. We are regulating our external presentation to ensure the other person feels heard and validated. This continuous self-monitoring and self-regulation is a high-energy activity. It creates a dissonance between our internal state, which might be craving stillness, and our external behavior, which is projecting high energy. That gap drains the battery profoundly.
It's interesting you mention micromasking, Alina, because recent studies suggest that this performative aspect is amplified in the age of social media and hyperconnectivity. We are conditioned to be on. But I want to pivot back to the biological cost. When we ignore the early signs of this fatigue, our body initiates a stress response. Cortisol levels can spike because the brain perceives the unrelenting social demand as a threat to its homeostasis. You might notice physical symptoms, a tension headache, a tightening in the jaw, or a sudden drop in body temperature. These are somatic signals that your system has moved from engagement to survival mode, effectively shutting down non-essential social circuits.
That survival mode is often when the irritability sets in. You might find yourself suddenly annoyed by a friend's laugh or a harmless question. This is the social hangover beginning in real time. It is a protective mechanism. Your brain is trying to make you unpleasant enough that you will remove yourself from the situation. It's a primitive drive for isolation to facilitate recovery. This is why the drive home from a social gathering is often done in complete silence. You are instinctively cutting off auditory input to lower the cognitive load. It is not that you don't love your friends. It is that your neural circuitry is currently inflamed and needs to cool down.
The social hangover is a very real physiological state. Researchers have looked at the recovery period required after intense social interaction. For introverts or highly sensitive people, the brain requires a significant amount of time to return to baseline arousal levels. During this hangover, the brain is essentially flushing out the metabolic waste products accumulated during high-focus activity. It's similar to how muscles need recovery after a workout. If you don't allow for this recovery, if you stack social events back to back, you risk entering a state of chronic burnout, where the recovery time needed becomes exponentially longer. It's a debt that accumulates.
There is also the element of empathy fatigue. If you are a person who deeply empathizes with your friends, who really feels their stories and emotions, you are activating your mirror neurons intensely. You are physically simulating their emotional state within your own body. If a friend is venting about a crisis, your body is mirroring that stress. Spending 3 hours absorbing the emotional fluctuations of others leaves you with a second-hand emotional load that you have to process and release. This is why deep, meaningful conversations are often more exhausting than superficial small talk, even though they are more rewarding. The emotional payload is heavier.
That is such a valid point. We often guilt ourselves for this. We think, I should be able to handle this. These are my best friends. But understanding the science of mirror neurons and sensory gating validates that the exhaustion is not a moral failing. It is also worth noting that the environment plays a huge role. Context collapse is a theory where different social spheres merge, like a wedding where you have work colleagues, family, and college friends. Navigating different social codes simultaneously requires rapid code switching, which is metabolically expensive. A one-on-one hangout is usually less draining than a group setting for this very reason.
Code switching requires the prefrontal cortex to constantly inhibit certain behaviors while promoting others. It is high-level inhibitory control. Now, let's discuss the restoration phase. When we finally get alone time, we often engage in what psychology calls numbing behaviors, scrolling on a phone, watching mindless TV. However, true restoration for a depleted social battery requires low stimulation rest, not just distraction. True restoration engages the default mode network of the brain, the network active when we are daydreaming or not focusing on the outside world. To recharge effectively, we need to minimize input, not just switch the type of input. Silence is actually functional here.
I think that is where many of us go wrong. We come home from a party and immediately jump onto social media, which is just another form of socializing and sensory input. We aren't letting the acetylcholine pathways do their work. Biologically, we need to lower our heart rate and reduce cortisol. Activities like a hot bath, walking alone in nature, or listening to instrumental music can help shift the nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. It's about signaling to the brain that the performance is over, the threat of judgment is gone, and it is safe to power down the monitoring systems.
Setting boundaries is the psychological component of this biological reality. Many of my clients fear that saying, "I need to go home," will be interpreted as, "I am bored." We need to normalize the Irish goodbye, or more politely, the fixed endpoint social interaction. Telling a friend, "I love you, and because I want to give you my best attention, I only have energy for 2 hours today," is actually an act of kindness. It prevents the resentment that builds when you push past your limit. It preserves the quality of the connection rather than stretching the quantity to the point of exhaustion.
That fixed endpoint strategy is brilliant. It also helps with the anticipatory anxiety that drains us before the event even starts. If you know there is a clear end time, your brain doesn't have to conserve energy for an indefinite marathon. It can spend energy freely for that sprint. It changes the neurochemistry of the interaction from endurance to enjoyment. We also need to recognize that our social capacity fluctuates. Factors like sleep deprivation, hormonal cycles, and work stress dramatically lower our sensory gating threshold. What you could handle last week might be impossible today, and that inconsistency is normal.
Consistency is indeed a myth when it comes to psychological energy. We must also address the introvert hangover guilt. You might spend the next day replaying the interactions, worrying if you seemed tired or checked out. This rumination is a secondary drain. It keeps the brain in a high alert state even when you are alone. Learning to trust that your friends love you for who you are, including your limited social battery, is crucial. True intimacy allows for silence. It allows for leaving early. If you have to perform limitless energy to maintain a friendship, that dynamic itself is what is exhausting, not just the neurology.
So, the takeaway here is that social exhaustion is a biological event involving neurotransmitters, sensory processing limits, and energy regulation. It is not a character flaw, it is a signal. The social battery is real, and it runs on specific chemicals that need time to replenish. By understanding your own limits, whether you are dopamine-driven or acetylcholine-driven, you can structure your social life to be sustainable. It is about quality over quantity. We shouldn't feel bad for needing to disappear into a dark room for a while. That is just the maintenance required for the machine.
Beautifully put, Jane. Embracing your need for solitude is actually the best way to become a better friend. When you are rested, your sensory gating works better, your empathy is more accessible, and you can truly be present. We need to stop fighting our biology and start working with it. The next time you feel that wall hit, listen to it. Go home. Rest. Your brain will thank you, and your relationships will be healthier for it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of social fatigue.
Thank you, Elena. And to our listeners, we hope this gives you the permission you didn't know you needed to protect your peace. If you found this helpful, please share it with that friend who always apologizes for being tired. They probably need to hear this the most. Until next time, take care of your mind and respect your